The effects of climate change on human health. It is important to focus on climate change as it has an influence on human health. Climate change can impact the overall health of both physical and mental health in numerous ways. Some existing health threats may intensify and new health threats may emerge. However, not everyone is equally at risk, and it is important to take into considerations the age, economic resources, and location as well. It is important to focus on climate change and the effects of the overall human health as well, because climate change threatens an individual's health both directly and indirectly, both through direct and indirect mechanisms. Individuals are having direct health consequences that derive from changes in temperature and precipitation and human exposures to heat waves, wildfires, floods, and droughts, which can include an increase in cardiovascular mortality during events of extreme heat, fatalities, and also multiple negative health consequences of fire smoke inhalation during wildfires. Some indirect impacts or effects may be triggered by climate change-induced environmental and ecosystem adjustments, such as crops that are not successful or crop failures, decreased marine food capture, geographic range expansion of disease vectors, and decreased labor capacity, and other examples as well. Climate change is the biggest threat to health in the 21st century, as World Health Organization has declared it as such. Climate change is a serious and important problem that affects our health in many ways, which is why it is important to focus on and shed light on the effects of climate change on human health. We have seen a rise in extreme phenomena such as heat waves, floods, and wildfires, which in turn can affect our overall health as well as threaten our food and drinking supplies and pollute the air we breathe. These issues can overall affect and impact our overall health, both physical and mental health. There are many different events that we can discuss that had an overall impact and effect to the human health, both physical and mental health, due to climate change events. According to Paolo Ciansoni, Sofia Betro, Luigi Ianneri, authors of the well-researched 2020 study, The Impact of Climate Change on Mental Health, a systematic descriptive review, states that, quote, rising temperatures, heat waves, floods, tornadoes, hurricanes, droughts, fires, loss of forests and glaciers, along with disappearance of rivers and desertification, can directly and indirectly cause human pathologies that are physical and mental, end quote. Which leads us to discuss the Hurricane Katrina incident, as this affected and devastated the U.S. Gulf Coast in 2005, contributed to the loss of nearly 2,000 lives, and displaces some 1.5 million residents, end quote, according to the authors Shanur Sira, Louisa Gustafson, and Melinda K. Abrams, as a study of 2022, the impact of climate change on our health and health systems. Wildfires also have a play in human health, as the air pollution is linked with respiratory and cardiovascular illness. Also, immensely hot weather and heat waves can cause an individual to have a heat stroke or a stroke, as well as exhaustion and worsen chronic health conditions. According to the authors Shanur Sira, Louisa Gustafson, and Melinda K. Abrams, a study of 2022, the impact of climate change on our health and health systems, quotes, the June 2021 heat wave in the Pacific Northwest led to 600 excess deaths in Washington and Oregon in 1 week alone, end quote. The most natural disaster that is common in floods, in which it causes injuries, drownings, as well as spread waterborne disease. According to the same article, quotes, in 2016, floods, excluding the landslides often caused by them, affected more than 74 million people globally, end quote. According to the author Deborah Wolf, in a 2021 article, How Climate Change Impacts Poverty, states, quote, Between 2030 and 2050, climate change is expected to cause approximately 250,000 extra deaths per year. That's from malnutrition, malaria, diarrhea, and heat stress alone, says the World Health Organization, end quote. Climate change is impacting and affecting families and communities as well in parts of the world. According to the author Deborah Wolf in a 2021 article, How Climate Change Impacts Poverty, states that, quote, prolonged droughts devastate food supplies and dry up water sources. Withered crops and starving animals destroy families' livelihoods. Hurricanes, floods, and landslides flatten or sweep away people's homes. Strife can occur within communities as families compete for available arable land, and families become separated as relatives relocate to search for work, end quote. Poverty indeed is related to human health, as it is evident that poverty does affect the overall health and the overall health of an individual. According to Poverty and Health, the Family Medicine Perspective position paper states, quote, poverty affects health by limiting access to proper nutrition and healthy foods, shelter, safe neighborhoods to learn, live, and work, clean air and water, utilities, and other elements that define an individual's standard of living, end quote. Climate change can also contribute to homelessness, hunger, and disruptions to education and the economy, all of which can have a profound negative impact on health. And it is important to note that these impacts and effects aren't just immediate and right away. They have long-term implications for individuals and the entire population. In regards to mental health and the aspect of how it is affected from or by climate change, is that, for an example, flooding and prolonged droughts can be connected to high levels of anxiety, depression, and post-traumatic stress disorder. Also, according to authors Shanor Sierra, Lovisa Gustafson, and Melinda K. Abrams, a study of 2022, The Impact of Climate Change on Our Health and Health Systems, states, quote, extreme heat can fuel mood and anxiety disorders and lead to suicide, interpersonal violence, and aggressions. Alterations to the natural environment can cause grief, emotional pain, and disorientation. They can also lead to poor work performance, lower self-esteem, and harm interpersonal relationships. Geographic displacement, which could be brought about by climate change, can produce distress, anxiety, and depression, and can even weaken social cohesion, end quote. It is evident that climate change has an impact on the overall human health, as it is stated on the EPA, United States Environmental Protection Agency, Climate Change and Human Health, stating, quote, the health effects of climate change include respiratory and heart diseases, pest-related diseases like Lyme disease and West Nile virus, water and food-related illnesses, and injuries and deaths. Climate change has also been linked to increase in violent crime and overall poor mental health, end quote. Authors Rob White and Diane Heckenberg of a 2014 book titled Green Criminology, An Introduction to the Study of Environmental Harm, discusses climate change and the effects of it as well. With having drought as well as higher temperatures, quote, will affect the food production, well-being, and safety in water-reliant economic sectors such as power generation, end quote. White and Heckenberg, page 106. It also mentioned that, quote, social conflict linked to climate change is as much as anything a reflection of social inequality and not simply determined by changes in environmental conditions, end quote. It gave the example of, quote, It has been observed that those most vulnerable to the consequences of climate change are people living in poverty and underdeveloped and unstable states under poor governances, end quote. White and Heckenberg, page 106. Also, according to EPA, United States Environmental Protection Agency, Climate Change and Human Health, quotes, climate change affects the food we eat, the air we breathe, the water we drink, and the places that provide us with shelter, end quote. In conclusion, climate change clearly has an impact and an effect on human health as a whole, both physically and mentally. Climate change constitutes many threats to the overall health, both mental and physical, as well as the well-being of all Americans. However, it is important to note that these impacts and effects aren't just immediate and right away. They have long-term implications for individuals and entire populations as well.